Hey, it's Marcel. I am geeked up about my new book that just got released worldwide. If you haven't heard, it's called Humane Leadership Lead with Radical Love, Be a Kick Ass Boss. Now, if you love the podcast, you're going to love the book. I spent several years researching the best skills and behaviors of people leaders that engage employees and drive results through a humane approach of empowering humanity, developing trust, and getting the best out of people. It's out now. Get it wherever books are sold. Humane Leadership. Lead with Radical Love, be a kick ass boss. Check the link in the show notes and grab your copy. Welcome to the Love in Action Podcast. I'm your host, executive coach, speaker, and author, Marcel Schwantes. I believe that when we show up with our full humanity to work and lead from a place of love, joy, purpose, care, and inclusion, it's going to make a radical difference in your leadership, your business, and your bottom line. This is a show about actionable, practical love, the verb, as a leadership and business strategy. Let's get rolling. Hey gang, welcome back to the show. You know, one of the themes of this show is to convince people of the big idea that, you know, when you create an atmosphere where people matter, where they feel significant, where they feel like they belong, that they can express their ideas openly and really just contribute their whole beings into their work. Well, if you've been listening to the show for a while, you know it's going to make a radical difference in how they work, how they perform, right? So the reality is that so many people, though, feel just the opposite. They kind of feel ignored. They feel underappreciated at work. I mean, is that you? Because that's really the reality for a lot of workplaces. So we're going to talk about whether you feel like you matter in the workplace. I mean, I felt like I didn't matter, like I wasn't significant eons ago back in my corporate life when I worked at a hospital in on the West Coast. It was a transactional experience. I felt completely invisible, felt lonely, in fact, and that negative experience had, well, as you can imagine, it had negative consequences on how I felt about my work, right? So my performance suffered. So in today's episode, we are going to talk to Zach Mercurio. He is the author of The Power of Mattering, how leaders can create a culture of significance. That was published by Harvard Business Review Press. This phenomenal book will be released on May 13th, but you can get it now on pre-order if you go on Amazon. It's available right now. I'm going to put the link to it in the show notes. So Zach is going to present this emerging science of mattering from his own research and then all of the prior research that he found previous to that really goes back like decades, and how experiencing matter to others is really a fundamental yet real overlooked requirement for thriving in the workplace. So, who is Zach Mercurio? Well, he's a researcher, author, and speaker. He works with hundreds of organizations worldwide to forge purposeful leaders who enable mattering, motivation, well being, and performance. Some of his clients have included the U.S. Army, Delta Airlines, Marriott, and the government of Canada. He also serves as one of author Simon Sinek's Optimist Instructors, and that's kind of cool. Zach earned his Ph.D. in organizational learning, performance, and change from Colorado State University. In fact, he lives in Fort Collins, Colorado, with his wife, two sons, and two adopted dogs. And Dr. Zach Mercurio now joins us. Welcome to the Love in Action Podcast.
Thanks, Marcel. It's great to be here.
Yeah, likewise, man. Full disclosure here, we've been bantering before we hit record, and I already messed up Zach's last name, Mercurio. So my apologies for actually doing it right in the introduction.
Don't worry about it. It's like Mercutio from Romeo and Juliet, but the T is an R.
All right, let's get rolling. So for those not familiar with you, here's the $1 million question. What's your story?
I'll do it in three chapters, three short chapters. Chapter one is I was a high school senior, and I was the youngest of three brothers. And when you're the youngest, you get really good at two things, entertaining yourself or comparing yourself to them. And I was middle of the road as a student, and I really didn't think I could go to college. I had very low self-confidence. I just didn't see myself there. And I had a journalism elective teacher my senior year of high school who every week would bring me in a brochure. And this is, yes, when we had brochures of a college. And she would say, Zach, I can see you here. Zach, I can see you here. Zach, I can see you here. And she was relentless. And I remember one day she brought in this brochure of this college. She goes, look at this journalism program. I really have seen you grow this year, and I know you can do this. And it was that moment that is the reason I'm here today, right? She believed in me, and I ended up going to that college in Virginia. I ended up majoring in journalism, which actually impacts how I think, how I write my ideas, how I express them today. And I don't remember her name, but it was one small 2-second moment of having someone believe in me
Yeah.
that actually led me to where I'm at today. But I didn't know that then, right? I know that now because we go into chapter two, which was when I was in college and I became seduced by success. I became educated for success. People started telling me, hey, you can make money if you do this. I know you're in journalism, but what if you're a copywriter in advertising? And I said, okay, I'll do that. And then I went into my first job in advertising. And just like you, Marcel, I felt insignificant. I remember I would go into work and my colleagues would talk about what they did last weekend or the weekend coming up. And it's astonishing how many people live for 2/7 of their lives. Those days that begin with the letter S when you think about it. And I was incredibly disillusioned. We would just talk about how we can make as much money as possible. And I felt insignificant. And that was when I met a cab driver who changed everything for me. I was in a parking lot in DC. I asked the cab driver, I said, hey, how's it going today? And he said, great. And he goes, I get to pick up people from around the world every half an hour. I'm people's friends they don't talk to, their parents they don't talk to. It's great. I expected this guy to hate his job, grumble about his job. And he left that parking lot. And that was that moment I was like, gosh, what is that? What is that passion? And what I found since that, which leads me into the final chapter here, is that he didn't talk about what he did. He talked about why he did it and who he did it for.
Mm.
And what we found in our research since, when I left that job, I wanted to dedicate my life to making sure that no one was in an environment like I was in again. What we found is that people who tend to experience great fulfillment, great energy, great joy, they think about how they matter to others. They
Yeah.
see how they matter to others.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that's why I'm here. And I've been researching what creates moments of mattering. How do we create cultures where people can see the significance that they have on other people ever since? But I will take it full circle. And it goes back to a small moment of mattering from that journalism elective teacher who believed in me. That is the only reason why I'm sitting here looking at you right now.
That is such a cool story. And I'm glad that you brought up the taxi driver as well, because, and as I reflect back on everything I read, now I'm hearing it from the man that wrote it and the man that experienced it. So it's pretty cool to do that. I didn't know that mattering, it's not a new label. I mean, I even wrote down in my notes, psychologist Morris Rosenberg coined the term mattering in the 80s. So I don't know if that's where the original research started, but talk a little bit about before your research, all the previous research on mattering.
Well, let's back up a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
To matter is a survival instinct.
So it's goes back
So,
even further than that.
yeah, I mean, for example, your first experience of mattering was when you were born. Everybody listening, scientists find the first thing you did, you have two instincts, two automatic actions we're encoded with, is we tilt our head upward at a very precise angle to find a caretaker, and we reach out our arm to grasp for significance. So the first things we do as a human being are wired to help us to matter to someone enough so they'd keep us alive. Think about this. No one listening right now would be here if at some point they did not matter enough to someone else so that person would keep them alive.
Boom.
It is primal, right? It's a
Mm.
primal survival instinct. We actually learn to matter before we learn to eat. And that instinct doesn't go away. So it evolves into the fundamental need to feel seen, heard, valued, and needed by the people around us as we grow up into adulthood. And a lot of that research, the Rosenberg research, was studying over 6,000 adolescents on things like what predicts depression or anxiety or poor well-being. And what he found was that those who felt that they mattered to their parents were far less likely to develop clinical mental health issues later on. But the distinction was mattering to parents didn't mean that their parents just loved them or they knew that their parents loved them. It's that they experienced daily acts where they felt seen, they felt heard, they felt that someone actually could name the unique value they brought to the family or to the world, and they felt needed by that person. So it's a survival instinct and it turns into a fundamental human need. And it's necessary for motivation, engagement, everything we say we want.
Yeah.
Because, like, if you woke up today and you didn't believe your life was worthy of the unrelenting energy you give it, you probably wouldn't have done much of anything today. So it's a prerequisite.
Yeah. Yeah. So for somebody listening that just wants like the super laser Cliff Notes version of what the definition of mattering is, what would you say in your own words?
Yeah, I mean, because we like these psychologists love these ing verbs, like like verbing things, like belonging, right?
Right.
So we have this need to matter, to feel significant to someone else. Mattering is when we experience the satisfaction of that need. So mattering is experiencing being significant to those around you that comes from two things: feeling valued by them, and then knowing how we add value to their lives. So mattering is the experience of feeling significant to others that comes from feeling valued and adding value.
Okay. So let's dispel any notion of what it is not. How do we distinguish mattering from what it may not be? People may think it is, but it's not.
Yeah, I think I told you earlier, I have a couple of elementary school kids, so I hear a lot about recess sports games. And so if I were to describe it in a metaphor for recess, school recess, we've heard a lot of words like belonging or inclusion, it used when we think about mattering. But belonging is feeling welcome, accepted into a group. Belonging is like being picked for the team. Inclusion is being able to actively contribute to a group. So, inclusion is being asked to play in the game. Mattering is feeling significant to individual group members.
Ah,
It's feeling that the team wouldn't be complete without you. Now, there's two important points here. If I were to do a belonging intervention, say in an organization, I would focus on like social connection, making sure people feel welcome, making sure people have the opportunity to connect with me and others. If I were to do a mattering intervention, I would have to make sure that everybody in that organization has the skills to make the next person they interact with feel seen, heard, valued, and needed.
hmm.
It's very different. We experience mattering through interpersonal interactions, not through programs, not through initiatives, not through theories, but through, and this is why this podcast is fantastic, through action,
Right,
through
right,
interaction.
right. Wow, and I can imagine that, and we'll get into the how to create a culture of mattering. But it's really like you said, it starts with individual or interpersonal relationships or interactions during the day, and that kind of creates a groundswell that people want to pay it forward as they learn the behaviors or the practices of mattering. Hopefully, that somebody can pick it up and pass it on.
Yeah, and what we've found in our research is that mattering happens in moments. We've come to call these moments of mattering, like that moment that I experienced with that journalism elective teacher was a small moment. And what these moments of mattering do is they help give us the external evidence of our significance. And there are two self-beliefs that really drive human behavior, right? We have to believe that we're worthy,
Yeah.
like that I belong here, like I'm worthy of being on this podcast right now. And then we have to believe that we're capable. So self-esteem and self-efficacy, they're called.
Right.
When moments of mattering serve to give people the evidence that they're worthy and that they're capable. In fact, the two most powerful predictors of those two self-beliefs are verbal reinforcement from others and supportive relationships.
Mm.
So what we're talking about is creating that environment of mattering. And we found that these moments, these like very small moments, can change the trajectory of people's lives and their careers in a matter of minutes.
That's amazing. So that begs the question. I know that we need mattering. You've done the research. We know that mattering matters. Why is there such a mattering shortage or deficit these days?
Well, I mean, we have to think about like how many of you listening have taken a course on how to positively affirm somebody or learned how to do that, right? I'm probably not seeing too many nods right now. How many of you all have gotten a course on a crucial conversation or how to give negative feedback? Most of us would
Yeah,
nod our
right,
head and raise our hand, right?
right.
So we tend to not approach topics like showing people how they matter with as much rigor as we approach things like how to improve performance or how to improve engagement or how to be more resilient. And what's ironic about that is that mattering actually comes before all of those things,
Exactly. That's what I was
right?
going to say.
So
Yeah,
like if you, for example, negative feedback or constructive feedback, if you want your feedback to matter to someone, they first have to believe that they matter to you. Right? If you want what you say to matter to someone, they first have to believe they matter to you. If you want your voice to be significant to somebody, their voice has to feel significant to you. They have to feel that. So we often like focus on these lagging indicators and don't focus on this leading indicator, which is the trust that is built when you actually see and hear and care for another human being. It's the relational groundwork that's really necessary for everything else. So I think we focus on lagging indicators a lot. The second thing is I actually think that what happened in the 1970s, there was a psychologist in the military that coined soft skills. And, I sort of lament him for doing that
me
because
too.
what happened was, and we don't even realize this, but anytime your brain thinks of something as soft or simple, your brain actually decides subconsciously to devote less energy to it.
Mm,
So when if something tells you, hey, Marcel, this is simple, go take a training class on it, you're probably likely to be on your phone, like doing other things. But if I say, hey, this is really hard, I mean, this takes a lot of work and practice, you need to pay attention, you're more likely to pay attention. So when we see something as simple, we develop an overconfidence bias, which means we think we're better at it than we are. And so I don't think we've developed these skills as rigorously as other skills. And then the third reason I think we're facing a mattering deficit right now is that over the last 20 years, since texting became ubiquitous in 2000, we've actually had to use these skills less and less. So, for example, if you give me some bad news, I can now text you, uh, hey, I'm sorry to hear that with a sad emoji. I don't have to like sit with you anymore and actually feel the discomfort, come to understand you, show compassion to you. Um, I just had an experience with this myself. My mom is a caretaker for my 101-year-old grandfather, and he recently had a stroke and he was in intensive care. And I was actually backing my car out to go to a meeting, and I was like, "Oh, I should see how she's doing." And I just texted her. I was like, "Oh, I hope everything goes well today with his move back to his facility." And then I was like, "Wait a minute. That's too easy." Right? Like that's not what she needs, just that text. She needs me to call her. She needs me to talk to her. And I sort of got emotional thinking about it.
mm.
Like technology has made it so easy for us to not use these skills. And when we don't use something, we become less proficient at it. And that's likely why, I mean, when you look at like Gallup engagement data, we're more disengaged than ever still. But if you
Yes.
look deeper, just 39% of people say that someone at work cares about them as a person. I don't think that it's because people wake up and say, I want to be an uncaring leader. I think it's because the skills to care have actually atrophied over the last 20 years, and we need to relearn them.
So fascinating that with the whole play on words with soft skills, and I like to always say, borrowing from Tom Peters, I think that soft is the new hard, and how I've sat in executive C-suites to start a leadership implementation that talks about these very topics of belonging and mattering and inclusion. And I get this look from the C-suite that this is not for us. This is for the people below us and those closer to the ground level. And it is just infuriating to me that those at the top aren't willing to champion these very principles we're talking about that are going to lend to higher engagement, higher performance, but they aren't willing to do it. I'm not saying it's every organization, but I'm giving you an example of what
Yeah.
I have faced sitting in these rooms with these cold stares and sort of, holier than thou looks like, oh yeah, we would love to implement some leadership training, but yeah, that's really for the people below us.
Yeah, and look, I have a lot of empathy for people in those
Mm.
positions too, because if my worth was determined by a quarterly earnings report, I would be focused on other things too.
Yeah.
I mean, we're built like, right? We try to survive and protect ourselves. But there's also something else going on here, and it's that we don't think as rigorously about these skills as we do other operational things in organizations. I got asked to work with a very large retail merchandising company. That what they do is they go in and they set up all the grocery store setups overnight. So when you come in, all the products displayed in a different way. A lot of frontline staff, tons of staff, really fast paced, high pressure. And I got to speak at a big company conference, and they were trying to get their people first culture off the ground. So I said to them, what do you do to make sure that the quality of the work is consistent across all these locations? And they went on about all of their processes and quality control processes in place and all of the ways their people get trained and evaluated. And I loved it. I was like, this is really amazing. I go, what do you do to make sure all of those people on those teams feel seen, heard, valued, and needed? And it was like silence. It was like, well, we try to hire the right people, or we have a LMS super excellence in supervisory online programming. But they had all of these ways to scale these operational skills, scale operational excellence. But they didn't have ways to scale the skills needed to produce the human energy to be excellent. And this is typically what happens. So I said, what it's going to take to get a people first culture down to the front line is we have to robustly scale these skills as robustly as we scale anything else, because just hiring good people, promoting good leaders doesn't work. Intuition doesn't scale. Hard practices and skills scale. So I've been on a mission to get organizations to use what they do well, which is scale process, into scaling human skills. And sometimes when executives think about it like that, it kind of it activates a strength they have and can kind of turn the tides a little bit.
Yeah. Let me go back to the research a little bit and tell me if I get this right. You spent 5 years poring over the data on mattering and significance, and then you realize that there was sort of a gap there, maybe about, well, this is all great, but what are the skills that we need to learn and implement? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the first study that we did was with a group of university cleaners, and it was on how cleaners in a very difficult, overlooked job experience meaningfulness in their work. So we were looking at meaningfulness, which is the experience that my work is significant. And what we found, and I opened the book with this because it's a story that really helped me to name that it's really moments of mattering that's driving this. And there was this woman named Jane, and she was near homelessness, and she just needed a job. And she said she took this job at the university because they're the only one that would hire her. And she said all of her friends were telling her, why couldn't you have done something more with your life? Why are you just cleaning? And she said she was really struggling with her self-worth. She would just clock in, clock out. And she said that she had one supervisor who brought her into a training room and opened a dictionary to the word custodian and said, "You are this person. A custodian is a person responsible for a building and everyone in it. That is you." And she told me, and I remember her face right now, even she looked at me and she goes, Zach, that was the first time in my life someone made me feel worthy. First time in her life, someone made her feel worthy and useful. And that moment, she said, changed her belief systems about herself and her job. She's now been at that job for almost 18 years. And what we've found since is there are these moments of mattering that contribute to thriving and well-being. And what we started doing is we started working with groups and other organizations to ask, okay, what are people actually doing when you feel that you matter? It's an exercise you could do right now, listening. Think about who makes you feel that you matter in your life, and think about what they do. And then think about what are the skills they used. So we asked that to thousands of people in all of these different groups. I mean, from cleaners to people on the manufacturing front lines to the top 200 leaders in the US Army, which was a fascinating experience. And they all said some version of three actions, right? Noticing, they felt noticed, they felt seen and heard. They felt affirmed. So someone actually named their unique strengths or saw something in them that they didn't see in themselves and named
Mm,
that. Or they felt that they were needed, that they were called upon, that they were essential, that there was a problem that only they could solve. And so we distilled all of this research from the last 40 years with the research on what people are saying people are doing in their lives. And it aligned really well to these skills that we've heard about in other areas, but now we can bring them together in service of this primal instinct, right, called mattering.
yeah. So noticing, we need to be noticed. And then there's two types of being affirmed, right? And seen and heard. So that's affirming. And then we need to be needed. So that's what it boils down to, these three components of mattering.
Yeah, well, noticing, so there's two parts of noticing, feeling seen and heard.
Oh, that's it.
So,
Okay.
yeah, that's all right. And then affirming is, yeah, we have to see the evidence of our unique significance in our environment. And then needed is we have to feel essential. Like we have to
Right.
feel like not dispensable.
Okay, good. Noticing is feeling seen and heard. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before, because I want to break down these components and their parts and talk about the practical elements. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about the opposite of mattering. So you label it simple enough, anti-mattering. So what happens? How do we, if I'm walking into a business establishment and it's clearly a place of anti-mattering, what am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I experiencing in that kind of culture?
Yeah, well, I mean, just as creating mattering happens in moments, creating experiences of anti-mattering happens in moments. And anti-mattering is just what it is. It was coined by a psychologist named Gordon Flett, and he paid homage to this physicist named Paul Dirac, who coined the term for dark matter, right? The inverse
Yeah.
of matter. So it has the inverse effect. So not anti-mattering is experiences where you feel insignificant. And it usually comes from five places, right?
Hmm.
Feeling unseen, feeling like you're overlooked, like you're forgotten, like your work isn't recognized, feeling unheard, feeling that your voice doesn't make a difference, feeling unvalued. So this is feeling the opposite of affirmed, feeling that your unique gifts or your strengths or your work doesn't really add any value. Feeling forgotten, and this is a big one. Like a lot of frontline workers that we work with indicate that they feel forgotten.
Yeah.
They're, you know, I always found it troubling that people had unsung heroes in their organization. Right? No hero should be unsung. And then finally is feeling dispensable. And I hear this one a lot. My manager told me that don't forget that everyone's replaceable. And it's astonishing because when people feel replaceable, they will act replaceable. Like, don't be surprised if someone who feels like a resource acts like one,
Yeah.
and they just up and leave. So those five things is something to be aware of, like moments that create feelings of being unseen. And one of the examples that stand out for me is there was a window washer that I worked with, and she told me that um, she had this great idea during her first week on the job. She was responsible for a team that had to go in the summer in Colorado and clean these bottom floor windows of this industrial complex every day. And she noticed in the first week that the sprinkler system was aimed wrong. And so it would leave these splotches. So literally the only reason why the task existed was because of a preventable issue. And she was so excited. She went to her supervisor. She said, "Hey, um, I have an idea." And the supervisor said, "Oh, that's the sprinkler people's problem. I need you to just do your job." And it was 5 years later that the supervisor asked me to come in and help these quote unquote unmotivated people. Were they unmotivated? No. They're people who experienced antimattering. What happens when we experience antimattering is we get what's called learned helplessness, which is being conditioned by the environment around us that we and our actions don't, can't, and never will matter. So what she did is she went and told her team. She said, "I had an idea," and they shot it down. And what do you think that team did? Oh, well, forget it. I mean, we're not going to raise our voice anymore. We're going to clock in and clock out. But these things presented as motivation issues. There are very few motivation issues in organizations. There are a lot of anti-mattering issues.
Mm. Yeah, and you described kind of how I felt, maybe how you felt as well in that previous job, and how I felt at the at the hospital. And Zach, it's almost like on an hourly basis, or it was for me. And things just kept spiraling and piling up to the point where it just my very soul was stripped out of my ability to do work well. And it caused some burnout as well.
If
Um,
you don't mind if you don't
yeah.
mind sharing, what were some of the things in the environment that were creating that feeling?
Oh, that's easy. Fear is
Mm.
a stifling pressure cooker environment that was reinforced by constant fear. Looking over your shoulder kind of thing. Because that was the culture that I inherited from a previous high level consultant that led through power control, command and control, and power moves and all that. And then that trickled down to people that learn those behaviors or misbehaviors. And that just kind of just, floated around from floor to floor, department to department. So it was a bad, toxic environment.
Mm. I
Yeah.
think that's important for other, and I think it's important for other people who are listening to think about this in this way that a lot of times we probably unintentionally create fear,
Hmm.
create these moments. I've come to call some of the moments that create that sprinkler issues, like that woman
Yeah.
experience. Like, what are the sprinkler issues in your organization that may be manifesting that fear, and that you may not even know about unless you thought about it? Because one of the things that you bring to mind is that a lot of leaders lead by trying to get people to comply.
Yeah.
Like, and when people comply, they do things because you want them to do it. And I think a lot of leaders miss the difference between compliance and commitment. Commitment is when someone does something because they want to do it.
Hmm.
And that takes, again, making sure they know that they matter, so they act like they matter. It is almost impossible psychologically for anything to matter to a person who doesn't first believe that they matter.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. They probably wanted high performance in that hospital. They probably wanted all of these metrics, but they were actually undermining the human psychology needed to get those metrics. And I think that's more rampant than we even think.
Yeah. Yeah. I believe so. Okay. So I'm thinking, I don't know, should we jump into how to create mattering?
Yes. Yeah,
I love it.
I'd love to.
Let's break it down. So this is for you listeners. This is when you take out your notebooks, or if you're listening in the car, yeah, please, keep driving. safely until you get home, and then re-listen to this episode because this is almost like the lesson part of classroom is in session with Zach here. Okay, so let's let's start with well, the first one, noticing. So two parts of that: how to truly see people, how to truly hear people. What's a good starting point for how to truly see people? How do we see better?
Yeah, so I use the word noticing because it's active. You can know your best friend but not notice that they're suffering or struggling. You can
Mhm.
know your team but not notice that maybe someone feels left out of discussions or that they don't have the same energy as they used to. Or you can know your child really well but not notice that they've stopped talking about their friends a little bit more. Noticing is the deliberate act of paying attention to the ebbs, flows, and details of people's lives, and then offering them an action to show them that they're thought about. And that's that part of feeling seen. Feeling heard is when the meaning behind our words, the voice and perspective underneath the surface is invited out in a climate of psychological safety. So there's this two components. Seeing people, I think that one of the things that's happening is that we have a bit of a hurry addiction right now.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think that's very important is that to actually see a person, we actually have to slow down because you can't really notice somebody if you don't create the time and space to notice them. And if you don't do some work on relearning your attention, how to pay attention. One of my favorite examples is we had a distribution center manager, and she was having a lot of trouble keeping track of all of her team members' lives and work. And so she started a practice 3 years ago that it was in this old moleskin notebook. She would write down on Friday, she would write down each of her team members' names and then write down one thing that she heard them talk about or complain about or that they were nervous about or that they were struggling with. Every week she would do this. And then on Monday, she started her week looking at her team of 19. She looked at their names and she would schedule a 3-minute check-in with each of them. And she would say things like, I remembered last week that you were struggling with this. I wanted
Mm.
to check in on how that went. I mean, there's magic in being remembered.
Yeah.
One of my practices is with my team is I write down on the top of my one-on-ones, I write down, don't forget to ask about
Yeah.
dot
Yeah.
dot dot, right? And it helps me remember somebody. So I would say the first step to seeing somebody is having some practice, process, tool. It doesn't have to be a noticing notebook, but having some practice to actually remember the details of others' lives and check in on them.
Yeah. It's really connecting on a deeper level, isn't it? I mean, even the questions that we ask have to change and go from superficial, hey, how you doing, to
Yeah.
more meaningful questions.
Yeah, so we also need the data to see people. And we often ask questions that don't give us the data to actually see beneath the surface. And one of the example that I give all the time is that, I travel a lot. I have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. If someone asks me, "How are you?" My brain can't compute like living the last 10 hours of a complex human life. So I just say, "Good, you?" And that's it. The person doesn't learn anything about me.
Mm.
I don't get to share anything about myself. Questions like "How are you?" Those are greetings. Those
Yeah.
aren't questions. So another practice, I mean, to see people is go beyond the greeting. If you're opening up meetings by saying, "How's everybody doing? Good?" You're missing an opportunity because if someone asks, "How's everybody doing? Good?" I hear that a lot. Imagine if someone wasn't doing well. Would they raise their hand and be like, "Not me"? Or I get this a lot. "I hope everybody's doing well." That's great, but like if I'm struggling, the last thing I need is your hope. I need your support. So we have these little like norms that actually like don't give us the data to see people. So a couple of ways to think about that is ask clear questions instead of "How was your day?" What was most meaningful to you today? What has your attention today? Ask open questions instead of like, "How was the podcast good?" You can ask, "Hey, what's the most interesting insight from the podcast, and when are you going to use it?" And ask exploratory questions instead of evaluative questions. As leaders, we often ask questions that are subtly evaluative.
Yeah.
What did you get done today? What did you accomplish? An important lesson for leaders is anytime you evaluate somebody, they will be on the defensive and give you a self-protective answer. You won't get the full. You won't get the full story. So instead of an evaluative question, ask, what was a project that was challenging for you today? How did you make it through? How did you navigate through that?
Yeah.
Right? So go beyond. So that's a great point, is go beyond that. Have a tool to notice, pay attention, have a way to ask deeper questions, make sure that you're following up. And that can actually open up the space to help people feel heard
Yeah.
as well. Because once they feel seen, once they know that you notice them, they know you're serious about them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you're serious about their voice as well.
Yeah, and it's funny as here we are talking about applying this to the workplace, but then the way that you describe it, just a thought triggered in my mind that these are the kind of questions that I ask my spouse as well to
Ah,
trigger
yeah.
deeper conversations, right? And even, I mean, going from work to now maybe, a marriage or a partnership is we tend to just kind of zone out at the end of the day and do our own thing, scroll our phones and watch our Netflix, and we're not engaging. And even if we do engage, it's like, hey, how's your day? Good. How's yours? Good. And you turn over and you go to sleep. So
Yeah.
this is prompting me now to like, okay, Marcel, like tonight, tomorrow night, these
Yeah.
are the questions I need to ask my wife.
Especially in work, our relationships can become defined by transactions of information.
Mm,
So a lot of the meetings I observe, for example, are update fests. Like it's like update, 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 update. It's information transactions. That whole like adage,
yeah,
most meetings could be emails, is accurate because most meetings are transactions.
right.
But like what can't be an email is me noticing that your parent is in the hospital and checking in on how you're doing.
Yeah,
Right. What can't be an email is if we had a disagreement, is starting to repair that or offer forgiveness. Right. Those are the things. And that's why great teams and great relationships, they tend not to just banter back and forth about what they're doing with one another. They talk about how they're being with one another.
yeah.
And, one of the things that I learned this. So parenting and leadership is very, I mean, the parenting is leadership. I've realized this through my research. My kid loves watching his tablet, right? His screen. I hate it. I don't want him to watch it. So I spend all my time saying, no, don't watch it. Time's up. And what do you think he does? He's all disgruntled and blah, 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 right? So I've been reading about these ways that we can foster mattering, and I realized, oh, wait a minute. I am totally undervaluing and not noticing him. And so I switched how I interact with him. Instead of saying, shut off your tablet, I sat down with him once and I said, hey, what are you watching? Like he put his headphone off and he was like, oh, it's this episode, this show. I was like, what do you like about it? He put his headphones around his neck, right? And we started talking. And very soon, like the tablet got shut off. Coming alongside with somebody, helping them feel seen, helping them feel understood, helping them feel like their experience, their existence is valid is so important to any of the transactional outcomes we want.
Ah, that's good. Yeah, and thanks again for that other lesson for my 11-year-old. Next time he's got his face is buried in his iPad. I know what to do now.
Seriously, just go sit. Hey, like, what do you like? Exploration,
Yeah,
understanding, interest. The
curiosity.
outcome is the same. You still may need to say, hey, it's time to the tablet over.
Yeah,
But the way you get there is you're building that relationship.
yeah,
And I think that translates really well into making sure people feel heard. Like when you ask questions, making them feel like they can share their voice and that you're actually interested and that it's safe to do so. Because if I'm just punishing my kid all the time, then do you think he's going to speak up when he did something wrong? If you're a coach of a sports team and you're just punishing people for doing something wrong, do you think they're going to ever say to you, "Hey, coach, I've been screwing up this type of pass in this soccer game. I need some help with it." No, but that's where learning comes in. That's where everybody gets better
yeah,
when people feel heard.
yeah. So good. Okay, this is really interesting to me. To help people feel noticed and to really see them requires empathy. And yet you talked about psychologist Paul Bloom's work, and he wrote the book Against Empathy, and how even if you don't exercise your empathy the right way, people can still feel unseen and unheard. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and by the way, I love perspectives on seemingly positive phenomenon. Like I love reading the other perspective, and Paul's work
Yeah.
is great. But what he's actually saying, he's not against empathy, but what he's saying is that empathy is coming to understand what someone's going through, a struggle, but compassion is offering an action that alleviates that struggle.
Yeah.
And what he advocates for is what's called rational compassion, for actually thinking about what is the action I can take that will most alleviate that person's struggle. So a lot of us feel empathy, a lot of us get overwhelmed with that empathy, and we don't know what to do. But he recommends a strategic approach, which again I love because it's skills based, is to think about what does this person need right now that can best alleviate that struggle. So
Hmm.
compassion is empathy in action. It doesn't have to be big though. You know, I was coaching a leader who had a meeting and he did a check-in and this one woman said she was overloaded. And he immediately said, "Hey, you know that meeting we have on Friday, every Friday? Why don't you take that off? Get caught up." Everybody relaxed on the call. And I love that because it's small, but it's actually fairly sophisticated. He knew right away that, hey, I can give her some time to get caught up by offering that right now. And he'd offer an action that could immediately alleviate that struggle. He did not say, "Oh, yeah, we all are. Can't wait to get through this week." Or "It's just that time in the quarter. It's just our industry." I see so many leaders normalizing despair instead of doing something about it.
Yeah.
But compassion, so compassion is taking an action, however small, to alleviate struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. Proactive compassion, right?
Yeah, proactive
Yeah.
compassion, but you can also see like right now, if you're a leader, you know that there are times of the year, times of the quarter, times in a project where people struggle.
Hmm.
So instead of just saying, "Oh, that's just how it is," think about the actions or resources you have that you could proactively alleviate that struggle. And just that conversation, like just doing that, having that conversation with leaders, having that conversation with a team can make a massive difference. Again, and that's what helps turn this stuff from common sense to common practice.
So let me touch a little bit on the making people feel heard part of noticing. And you talked
Yeah.
about social rules or norms that we have to create, that we have to, employ in our workplaces. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, psychological safety, and I know you've had Dr. Edmondson on.
Yeah.
Psychological safety, right, is the belief that we can speak up, share our voice without fear of being retaliated against, without fear of being seen as ignorant or being ostracized from the group. The word voice there is really important because someone's voice is not the words they say. Someone's voice is their inner experience. Sociologists call that voice, our inner experience. So when Edmondson talks about that in psychological safety, someone's voice is heard. They're talking about what's beneath the surface. How can that be invited out? That true perspective be invited out. And one of the ways to do that is to have social norms that guide how we interact with one another so that they feel like that voice can be invited out and can be spoken without fear. And uh, some social rules look if you are in an organization in the US, especially, you've probably heard of OSHA,
Hmm.
like the occupational safety rules. We have those posters, we put them up.
Yeah.
Those posters work. I know it seems weird, but they work because of one reason. Researchers have studied them. They work because they raise what's called hazard consciousness. So if people see a poster, if I see a poster in your workplace, Marcel, I know that you are aware of the hazards here because you put that poster up. The same is true for psychological safety. If we have rules, ways of engagement, I, as an employee, know that you and all of us are aware that there are some hazards here that cause people to feel unseen, unheard, unvalued, and that their voice is insignificant. And so having that list of social rules like no interrupting, um, uh, pause after someone speaks, pause before you offer your response to make sure you fully understand them. Um, no looking over ideas, whatever it is for your organization, having that like safe meeting checklist,
Yeah.
those norms of interaction is very powerful because then if you interrupt me in a meeting, it becomes less emotional. I don't have to be like, "Oh, what's wrong with you, Marcel?" I can say, "Hey, you know those norms we agreed upon?" And actually, they're right here in the chat in the Zoom call. I was just noticing the interrupting one there. And normally, if people have talked about, they're like, "Oh, yeah." Right? It's very powerful.
I had a client that had people that signed their offer letter. They would also sign a performance agreement that had the team agreement rules, and they had to sign that too.
Yeah, that's great. And what those do is, it's again, it's objective signals in the environment that
Hmm.
this is a place where we're going to interact in a certain way. And when we don't interact in a certain way, we'll hold each other accountable. And
Yeah.
it's a virtuous cycle. So you create the psychologically safe space. People feel like they can report or talk about violations, which produces more psychological safety. And it's a virtuous cycle.
Yeah. Okay, I'm ready to transition. So we've been talking about noticing one of the three. The second one is affirming. And you have the way that you dubbed it is how to show people they're significant. What's a good starting point here?
Well, a great starting point is we're recording this on Employee Appreciation Day,
That's right. March 7th.
March 7th. And a lot of organizations have appreciation programs or recognition programs. And it's important to know that you can have an appreciation program that you give them kudos, you have peer nominations on a platform, and all of that is great. But if that person goes into their workplace every day, goes into a meeting, and they feel that they are insignificant and that their strengths aren't valued by the people they interact with daily, it's going to create even more dissonance. I remember I had a one of the janitors told me, "Don't give me a free sandwich or certificate. Say, remember my name and say thank you." And I think that that is so emblematic of the need for moving from just appreciation to affirmation. So affirmation is showing people how their unique gifts make a unique difference. So two sides. We have to show people their uniqueness. We have to show them how their uniqueness makes a unique difference. It's different than appreciation or recognition. So appreciation is showing general gratitude for someone. Recognition is showing gratitude for what someone does. Affirmation is showing people the specific evidence of their unique significance.
Hmm.
So, so an example of that is collecting and telling people stories, real stories, indisputable stories of how they matter, how their work and how they are significant. One of my clients was the National Park Service, and I had a facilities management manager who had a great practice to do this. I thought it was really innovative. He works with facilities managers who are in very like inhospitable environments who help make sure these national parks facilities are available for all of us, and high turnover, low morale. So he started a practice every Friday. He would go around during the week and take pictures of visitors like walking across a bridge that was just repaired or like using a bathroom that was closed so the line is less because there's now two bathrooms, reopening that, or a visitor center walkway that was redone. And he would send these pictures every Friday and he would say, "Look what you did, look through these, look what you did, that was it." And that's affirmation. You're showing someone the indisputable evidence that they matter. And I think that that's what goes beyond just a leader saying, "Hey, you matter. Don't forget that you matter." Affirmation is showing some of the indisputable evidence that they matter. So one practice is to collect and tell stories of people's significance of their work.
Yeah. And you have another great one. Gosh, I was hoping you would share this one, but you can give the Cliff Notes version is the plumbing story where you
Oh
showed up to
yeah.
deliver the session to a group of plumbers, right? I mean, that to me is like the epitome of making significance happen for people that don't feel like they matter. Share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So another way to do it is again, when it has to be real. So a lot of organizations struggle with this. A lot of organizations that want to be purposeful, they tell people, "Oh, we're changing the world. We have a big purpose." But people actually have to see it and feel their significance in the moment. So I worked with these plumbers after a 14-hour shift. It was the most difficult group I've ever worked with, I thought, because as I went in front of the room, they turned these cold metal chairs away from me. And I heard them complaining about being there as I was starting my talk, right?
They even said, I'm going to sneak out after I eat the
So
sandwich.
someone said I'm going to sneak out, like loudly. And so what I did is I had this prepared. I kind of knew this was going to happen, and my kid loves this donut shop, and this donut shop was in this new plaza that was developed in the town I live in Fort Collins, Colorado. And this group did the plumbing infrastructure for that project, that new plaza. So I just put a picture of him, my kid stuffing his face with this donut, and his eyes closed, and it's pure joy. I found it on my phone, and I showed it to them. I go, "What do you notice here?" And that was it. And one guy in the back was like, "Oh, your kid loves donuts," and there was some laughter. But there was a woman who actually was like, That's the Exchange, which is the name of the plaza." Like, she said, "Guys, we did that," and it was like you could hear a pin drop
Mm,
because I said, "You see that joy on his face? Like that only exists because you did the plumbing infrastructure for that project."
yeah.
They couldn't argue with me. They couldn't say, "Oh, this is the fluffy stuff. This is the touchy-feely stuff." It was right there. You can't argue with that. And I had a journeyman plumber come up to me, and it was actually an emotional moment. And he said, "I've been doing this work for 30 years, and I've never thought about my job that way.
Mm,
I've never thought about the people that use the buildings I do the plumbing infrastructure for."
yeah, that's good.
So, other ways that you can do that is anytime you say thank you, right? Go beyond the thank you, and tell people exactly how they made a difference for you.
Hmm.
And name the unique gifts they use. I really noticed your strengths here. I really noticed your wisdom, your perspective. I really saw this unique impact you make. Just go one step further and give more meaningful gratitude. That's another way to tell someone the story of their significance.
Love it. Yeah. Yeah, because we talk so much about gratitude. 100 books have been written on gratitude, but do people still feel significant when you give gratitude, right? But doing it this way and just that
Yeah.
illustration and the emotional response from the plumber after 30 years that's the icing on the
But
cake, right?
that's very common. If
Yeah.
someone introduces yourself to you, if you're at a networking event, and if they say, "Oh, well, I'm just an accountant. I'm just this. I'm just that." After this podcast, be attuned for that because that word "just" is a signal,
Mm,
and it's a signal that people have lost a sense of that significance.
yeah.
And I hear that a lot. When I ask people when they most felt like they mattered, one of the words that they typically use at the beginning of their answer is, "Well, I actually felt like I mattered when." And that word "actually" is really important because it means that it doesn't happen often. It actually mattered. So these small moments, and one of the things that we're particularly bad at is we tend to have an underestimation bias where we underestimate how small acts of gratitude, small things we do actually make a big difference. So, if you're listening right now, think of someone you're grateful for in your life. And now think about the last time you actually told them.
Mm,
And there's often a gratitude gap there.
yeah. Ooh. Okay. Boy, that's deep. So now you got me thinking. Okay, let's transition to the last of the three. And we've already touched on it's needing. So we
Yeah.
need to show people that they are needed. I love, I mean, you mentioned earlier when people feel replaceable, they act replaceable. That's classic to me. So maybe we can start with people that are still feeling this is just too touchy-feely. I'm not into servant leadership, yada, yada. Why is this so important for the workplace, for business?
Every leader wants effort, right? Everybody wants effort. They want productivity. They want performance. People will not exert effort if they feel dispensable. I'll give you a great example of this. In 1913, a French agricultural engineer named Max Ringelmann had students pull on a rope as hard as they could. Now, the first time they did it, he had them pull on the rope individually, as hard as you could, and he attached it to a dynamometer that measures force. And then he had groups pull on the rope as hard as they could. And what he did is he added up all of the force readings. Did a sum of the force readings for the individuals and a sum of the force readings for the group. And if I were to ask you who exerted the most total force, the individuals or the groups, most people in most audiences tell me it is the groups. obviously. It wasn't. It was the individuals. The individuals had the most total force ratings. Why? Because they knew their effort was indispensable. They knew their effort was irreplaceable. They were the only one pulling the rope. So no one was going to do it for them. And this is why when you make someone feel dispensable, they will act dispensable. They won't show up. They won't commit. They'll go somewhere else for an extra 25 cents on the hour in a heartbeat. But when you make sure someone knows how they and their efforts are indispensable and you show them measurably every day, we couldn't do this without you, and you mean it, people show up, they commit, they act irreplaceable. It's a basic psychological law. If I were to ask you to come to my dinner party tomorrow night and you were just being nice and you said, "Yeah, I'll go." And then you get up tomorrow morning and you don't want to go, very easy for you to get out of that plan, right? But if I told you, "Hey, Marcel, I need you to come to my dinner party tomorrow night. I need you to bring that dessert you make." You wake up tomorrow morning, you don't feel like going, but then you think, "Oh, shoot, Zach needs me to bring dessert." How hard is it to get out of that plan? Very hard, right?
Hmm.
This is not about psychologically manipulating people to attend your dinner parties, but it is about the power of when we feel that we're needed, we show up, we commit.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you think this is about as touchy-feely as feeding someone who's hungry for lunch. I mean, let's go back to the beginning. This is a basic need. This is you, if you're a leader right now and you think this is touchy-feely, your survival also depended on mattering to someone.
Right. Yep. Yep. All right. So bring this down to the practical. For those of us that are starting our journey into helping people feel needed, what are some ways to do it?
Yeah, I mean, I would just start with 5 words. And there's these 5 words that came out of our interviews when we asked people what the people around them did to help them feel that they matter.
Yeah.
Almost everybody said some version of they said, "If it wasn't for you." So that's it. If it wasn't for you. I mean, think of someone on your team that you rely on, but you've never told them. Most of the times we assume that people know that we rely on them, but many people underestimate their own impact. So when we don't tell them if it wasn't for you and say why we rely on them, they won't know that. So use those words. If you have an employee group that you're listening and you think is the unsung heroes, tell them if it wasn't for you. Better yet, if you can show them measurably how they're indispensable. I worked with the CEO of a marketing agency, and she had this junior employee who was helping with some social media campaigns for some clients, struggling with confidence. Always came to her asking for like validation and support. And she did something really remarkable. She actually pulled the engagement data from campaigns that he was involved in against campaigns he wasn't involved in on the team and showed him because she knew he was a high performer, a really good talent. And she said, "Look, when you're involved, this is the difference." And she said, after, right, because he measurably saw how he was needed.
Hmm. Okay, this one is for the metrics data geeks listening. How do we measure this thing called mattering?
Well, there are a number of ways. I mean, there's a general mattering scale. I don't know if you have show notes, but we can offer that.
Yeah.
There's a scale that's been validated. It's 5 questions. It asks people to rate how much they feel that they matter to those around them. You can also take all of these practices under the noticing, affirming, and needing practices and do a self-assessment. And it's a frequency of behavior. It's not how good of a leader you are. It's how frequently you check in on people's personal details. 1 to 5. How frequently do you give meaningful gratitude? 1 is not very often, 5 is always. And what's remarkable is once we do this and actually give ourselves an objective number, again, it comes out of common sense into common practice. For example, no one gives themselves a 5 on anything. So this gives you an opportunity to say to yourself, okay, what do I need to do more of and where do I start? And you can also measure your teams on this as well. And then the best part is when those team assessments and the leader assessments come together and teams and leaders actually talk about this. what can we get better? How can we get better at this? Because what an organization talks about, they typically become.
I'm looking at the book right
Oh
now,
yeah, yeah, you
and
have your
yeah,
advanced
I mean,
copy.
and it's right. It's right there. You got the mattering blueprint,
Yep.
evaluating your own mattering behaviors, assessing general experiences of mattering. There's your mattering audit, folks. It's. I mean, this is a
Yeah, so chapter 8 of that book, if you don't want to read
yeah,
anything else
yeah.
in that book, and if you're one of those leaders that's like, I listened to the podcast, I got it. Um, Go to chapter 8 because chapter 8 is how to scale it.
Yeah.
And there's a great example of a full scale transformation there in a dispersed team globally that was quite remarkable, who took this on and took it seriously.
Hmm.
And that I think people will be really interested in. And it's all right there. You can just use it. Use that. Just use that. Use the tools. Make them your own. But the key is again, the key of that chapter is to make this scalable. To take it out of intuition
Hmm.
and make it measurable. Make sure that the environment makes it possible, and talk about it. Add it into your everyday narrative.
Funny that you said make sure the environment makes it possible because that could be the actual stumbling block.
Absolutely.
Is you inherited a culture that doesn't value significance. So
Yeah, that's a really important one because environment either makes behavior possible or determines it will occur. So, like for example, if I move into my neighborhood and there's a swimming pool, it makes it possible that I will swim. If I have to pass a swimming test to live in that neighborhood, it determines that I will swim, right? Some environments don't even make it possible to care.
yeah.
Distribution centers who manage people's everyday moment and they want their leaders to care and improve engagement. The environment's not making it possible to do that. Or your environment, you give people trainings on psychological safety, but they're not measured on it, how psychologically safe people feel. The environment doesn't determine that it will occur. A lot of times, I think what's happening is we have the concepts right. We're going to all the trainings, we're listening to the right TED Talks, we're reading the right books, but our environments aren't determining that the behavior will occur as it determines the quality of everything else in our organizations. I want to get people to that level of rigor.
Whew, yeah, that's good. All right, as we wind down here, Zach, anything we missed that we should, cover that our listeners must absolutely know?
I think that this can be overwhelming. And one of the things I don't want this to do, I never wanted this book to ever produce any feelings of guilt. Because guilt, when I've been researching this as a parent, I started to feel guilty. And guilt is a barrier to action because when you start feeling guilty, you start feeling defensive. Well, I don't need to do this. This isn't me. This isn't my organization. This isn't my leadership style. This isn't how I was raised. This isn't how we do it in my industry. All of those are usually excuses to not do the hard work. And so remove the guilt and try it. It's a practice. It may feel forced at first, but that's how you get better at it. And so don't feel guilty. Think about it as an ongoing practice, an ongoing aspiration. I teach and research the things I need to hear most. So if you think I'm just this like perfect mattering guy, I'm not out there screaming if it wasn't for you to everybody who walks by me, right? I have to deliberately think about it, practice it. I have to know when I want do-overs, if I screwed up. So I really encourage everybody listening to take it to heart like that instead
Mhm.
of this is some out of touch theory in a book. It's
Yeah,
not. It's something that we have to practice and do, and it's messy.
yeah, yep. Okay, we've arrived at our speed round. You ready? Strap on the
I'm
seatbelt.
ready. I'm ready.
Okay, here we go. Best book you've ever read.
Oof. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
That's just about every. It's funny that the last two guests also cited that as their best book. Okay, greatest lesson you've ever learned in life.
Mm. Um, it was by another custodian in our study who I asked her what her favorite part of her job was, and she said it's the part she hates the most, which is cleaning the university bathrooms. And she said that every time I go into that bathroom, I say to myself, I'm cleaning this bathroom so that these kids don't get sick. And And I loved that. She had this so that mentality. So
Yeah.
linking what you're doing to its inevitable impact. So that it's probably one of the best ideas I've ever learned.
I love it. I love it. All right. Somebody that inspires you right now.
I'm gonna have to go with my 7-year-old. He has a facial difference. He's actually has a genetic condition that makes his eyes much smaller. He doesn't have eyelid muscles that help him open his eyes. And so he has a difference. And a lot of people look at him, a lot of people stare at him, a lot of people give comments to him. But the courage and the way in which he approaches those conversations, like with other people with empathy, is incredibly inspiring.
Okay, keeping this one PG or PG-13. Something that nobody knows about you.
Um, I'm really into nobody knows about me. Oh gosh, this is hard. I'm really well, I'll go a little bit deeper. I was going to give a hobby, but I'm really into like dystopian sci-fi books and horror movies.
Are you?
Totally. Yeah. Nobody knows that. But the reason is I just love I love the escapism of it. It's again, I talked to you about the importance of looking at the underbelly of positive phenomena.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important, like not to just take things at face value, but look at the full spectrum of human experience. So
Mm.
I watch a lot of that type of stuff and read that stuff.
Well, that's interesting. I am hooked right now by a series on Apple TV called Severance.
Oh, it's everybody. I get messages all the time, Zach, given your work, you need to watch this. I have to watch it.
Man, that's good. All right. Name a person, dead or alive, you'd like to have dinner with.
Mm. I would actually like to have dinner with my grandfather,
Oh,
who had passed away when I was very young.
okay.
So I didn't really know him on my dad's side, but I know of him, and I never got to really talk with him. So I think he's one of those relatives that I haven't gotten to talk to. So I think I'd really love to talk with him.
Yeah, interesting. I never met my
Yeah.
grandpa on my mom's side. So, yeah, okay. Your biggest hope for 2025.
My biggest hope is that we will go beyond thinking about things like there's a loneliness epidemic, there's a disengagement crisis, we have a technology addiction, which although those things are very popular to talk about right now, but go beyond that to then thinking about how the solution to those things is available in our next interaction.
Hmm.
That really, really, this is a mattering deficit. I'm convinced of that, and which is good news because it means we can do something about it.
Hmm.
It's not theoretical. It's interactional.
Yeah. Well, congrats. You have survived the speed round.
Good. I'm glad. I'm
Okay, we
glad.
bring it home as we do with every guest with two traditional theme questions. Here's the first one. It's the love question. So sticking with any topic we talked about mattering and significance, how do I lead with more actionable, practical love day in and day out?
Biggest advice I would give is to what I call schedule your good intentions. You already know the right thing to do, right? You already know that you should check in with somebody, write that thank you note, give somebody some affirmation. The next step is turning that into a deliberate practice.
Yeah.
I am the kindest person in the world when I'm out walking my dog. I think of all the people I should thank, all the letters I should write, all the people I'm grateful for. But then I go back to my desk and I have this big to-do list. And I get right into that. It's amazing how often we put off kindness for answering another email. Schedule your good intentions. If you have the intention, put it on your to-do list, put it on your calendar, and do it. Try it.
Yeah, this so aligns with the whole theme of love and action, folks. I mean, if you don't put deliberate or have deliberate intentional action behind what you're learning, this whole thing means diddly squat. Love and action. That's
Yeah.
the word action is in there for a reason. So, very good, very good. Okay, bring us home. What's that one thing you want people to take away from your book?
That your next great leadership act is your next interaction.
Yes, I love it.
So how you show up in that next interaction is how you start changing a culture and how you maintain a culture.
That could be your very next interaction after listening to this show. Mm.
Absolutely. Whether you're disagreeing with somebody, whether you're having to get someone to do something, whether you are thanking somebody, how do you make sure that that person feels noticed, affirmed, and needed in that interaction?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, the book again is called The Power of Mattering: How Leaders Can Create a Culture of Significance. I'm holding the advanced reader's copy. Yours will not look like this.
Right.
Zach, if people want to connect with you, learn more about you, what you do, and how to find your services, where can they go?
Yeah, you can go to zachmercurio.com, Mercurio. And I'm also on LinkedIn. I have a really interesting LinkedIn community of people who agree with me, disagree with me, but all in service of how do we reskill leaders to care. And it's really just insightful discussion. So check that out.
Yep, I follow you on LinkedIn. I haven't had a reason to disagree with you yet. So,
Oh, if you do, let me know. I mean, I do. I have some people who will say, "Oh, well, this is all touchy-feely stuff," and
right.
I'll say, "Oh, like give me your counter post. What is your counter post to this?"
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for every one of those you get, probably get about 20 of those because I got the fuzzy word in there called love that frames most of the work I do. So, yeah, I hear
And
you.
love, I mean, love is the engine of all of this.
Yeah. Zach, it's been real. It's been fun, man. We got to do it again. Thank you
I
so
know this was
much.
great.
Yeah,
This
it's
was great.
awesome. Good
Thank you.
stuff. Yeah. All right, guys. You can keep the conversation going on social media with hashtag Love in Action Podcast. And look for my show notes. Go to my website, pull that up. I'm going to have the YouTube link for you to watch this very episode. You can go to my website, marcelschwantes.com. For Zach Mercurio, I'm Marcel. Remember, in the end, love wins. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Love in Action podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it, subscribe, and leave us a review. Until next time, don't forget, the future of leadership is love in action. Believe it, practice it, and watch your leadership and business flourish.